Hey adventurers, it's Bethany, and this is the Hatchet project. So as promised, today's episode is going to focus all on survival shelters. Unfortunately, like other videos of this nature, I won't be going out and demonstrating, but for two very good reasons. First, because it defeats the purpose of the Hatchet project, which is to test the plausibility of survival with only book and or TV smarts. And secondly, it's a little hard to build a survival shelter in the middle of an urban area. Let's start with the basics. There are several different classifications of shelters, and to know which one's going to suit your situation properly, you need to know a few things about your environment. So where are you? Are you in the desert, the jungle, a rainforest, the mountains? Is it snowing? Is it raining? Is it windy? What kind of predators are you encountering? All those sorts of things. So for the purpose of this video, I'm going to focus on the types of the environment that I will encounter during the Hatchet project. I'll be in Southeast Alaska, a temperate rainforest, emphasis on the rain, so I can expect it to rain probably quite a bit. It may be a little bit windy depending on my location. It's also brown bear country. With all of that said, there's several different survival shelter designs that I could go with, but let's look at forest shelters. So there's several different categories. There's natural, open, enclosed, body heat, and tarp, which are variations on the other categories, assuming you have a tarp with you. Natural shelters are places you can hole up in with little to no effort. They're already standing, so caves, a tree well, those sort of places that don't require a whole lot of effort other than laying down maybe a debris bed or a bow bed. A tree well is usually a somewhat aged tree with low branches all the way around it that has kind of a already soft underside. They provide good roofing and keep you away from the elements a little bit. They're really good if it's snowing. A debris bed is basically a bunch of forest debris, so moss, leaves, branches, those sort of things that you can pile on top of each other to make the ground a little more soft and comfortable to sleep on. A bow bed, on the other hand, is a little more complex. You take some logs, kind of build a frame, and then lay some smaller ones across for slats, and then line that with debris. This gets you up off the ground, which can suck your body heat, so if it's a cold environment, you really can't afford to lose body heat, and this will help save your life. Open shelters are constructed so that you have a roof or a windbreak, with their primary purpose being to reflect fire's heat back at you so that you get the heat from the fire side as well as warming your backside with it reflecting off the wall. Two examples would be a lean-to and an A-frame. A lean-to is generally constructed with a ridgepole either resting on two limbs of two nearby trees or posts that you create yourself. You then take several sticks and lean them up against one side, hopefully lashing them down, and then you can create roofing by weaving other sticks through it, lining it with bark and moss, creating a wall of debris to help keep rain and wind out. An A-frame shelter is very similar. Again, it has a ridge pole either between two trees or two poles you construct yourself, and then like the lean-to, you line sticks for roofing, but not just on one side but on two sides, creating kind of an A-frame shape, and then roof the same way. Enclosed shelters take a little more time, but when built properly they can house a fire and trap heat, keeping you warmer longer and with less effort. Examples would be a wickiup, a wigwam, and a Salish subterranean shelter. A wickiup shelter is essentially a teepee. They can be partially or fully enclosed. They stand up to wind and weather. You can put a vent in so your fire can be inside, and most importantly, they go up pretty easy as long as you have access to long but slender logs and a means of lashing them together. A wigwam is a more complex version of the wickiup. Using long and limber poles, you bend them into a dome-shaped framework. From there, you lay smaller green poles around the structure until you are able to cover it with bark, moss, and or debris. This is another structure that you can install vents into in order to place your fire inside. Salish subterranean shelters, say that 3 times fast, were commonly used by coastal Alaskan tribes, but are impractical unless you have a way to dig. That being said, they take up a lot of energy, but have a greater potential to protect you from extreme heat and cold. They are constructed by digging a 3-foot circular hole of a desired circumference. Then you drive supporting poles into the ground around the hole at an angle, but leaving a gap at the top to serve as a smoke vent, as well as the entrance to the shelter. You then lash smaller poles around and begin layering the walls with bark and such, then cover it in dirt. Body heat shelters are exactly how they sound. They're small and they trap body heat. The most common is a debris hut, which is at its core just a pile of forest debris piled up with a hole in it big enough for you to squeeze into. Tarp shelters are awesome at trapping body heat and keeping you warm, but they only work if you have a tarp, poncho, parachute, or something of the likes. So common tarp shelters are the wedge, wing, burrito, teepee, A-frame, and hammock. The wedge is essentially an open A-frame with the middle of one end strung up and 4 corners pinned down. The wing takes a tarp and ties 2 opposite corners high and 2 low, which allows for the tarp to billow in the wind kind of like a sail, and it covers a larger space and drains away from you. A tarp teepee is taking the wickiup one step further. You construct it the same way, but before you layer on your roofing, you wrap it in the tarp for an extra level of insulation. I would still recommend layering other things on top of it just for that added protection. A tarp A-frame can be used in multiple ways, but the construction for each is the same. You run a rope or pole between 2 trees or poles and drape the tarp over it, with the center resting on the ridge. You then lash down the corners, creating an A-frame roof that allows for some wind protection and rain to run off away from you. You can construct these at varying heights depending on your need. So some people like to construct them really low to the ground. Some people like them a little bit higher so that you can have room within your shelter. A tarp hammock is what it sounds like, a hammock made from a tarp. This gets you up off the ground if it's wet or covered in bugs. All you need is some rope to tie up the ends and tie them to a couple trees, and ta-da, you have a hammock. There's one final type of shelter I want to talk about, but it's not really part of the forest survival shelter classification. It's more of a swamp shelter, or I like to call it a tree shelter. What it's used for is much like the hammock, but it's a platform in the trees that gets you up off the ground. If you're in like a swamp or a marsh, keeps you out of the water, but it can also keep you away from predators such as bear, which are my major concern for this project. So a tree shelter is constructed by taking 2 logs and running them between 2 sets of opposing trees. After lashing them in, you lay smaller poles across them to create a platform where you can sleep, store any tools or food you may have, use as a vantage point for hunting, and stay away from ground-dwelling predators. By doing this, you have also constructed a roof which you can construct a fire beneath. Overall, this seems like my best option. However, it will require the most amount of work. Although a tree shelter is what I'm leaning towards, the type I decide to build will completely be dictated by the environment that I find myself in, as well as the weather, materials I have at my disposal, and the condition I find myself upon becoming stranded. Thank you all so much for tuning in this week. If you're a first timer, welcome. I hope you come back next week. We'll be talking about water safety and how to make it consumable in the wilderness. Also, don't forget to check out our Indiegogo campaign. We're slowly making our way to our $6,000 goal. We recently got a donation of $500, which is awesome. Please keep sharing and doing what you can to help promote our campaign. Every cent counts, because this documentary is extremely important to help save lives. And once again, until next time, I'm Bethany, and this is the Hatchet Project.